That's what bye week is all about. Got a little downtime up in the great state of New Jersey with the Smithereens. And my next guest once came to us from New Jersey. And, probably like, a ragweed out there in the open. He never left. He just grew on Baltimore. He's been my friend for 3 decades. And, I bring on John Eisenberg all the time, and I call him one of my mentors. This is another guy that mentored me over a few frosted Mick Lights at Burke's, as well as some crab melts and some onion rings. He was the longtime sports columnist, then humorist at the Evening Sun. I need a moment of silence for the Evening Sun before I introduce him. Oh, that's about enough there. Kevin Cowherd, a longtime author, journalist, book writer, and man about Baltimore, joins us here live via satellite from his palatial estate in Lutherville. Cowherd, I don't have you on the program often enough. I mean, people think we don't like each other because we don't talk. We're not seen publicly together enough, I don't think.
Yeah, I haven't seen you in a while. Hey, let me correct something right away. I'm from New York, Nestor.
But you worked in Jersey.
Oh, I worked in Jersey, but originally from New York. So in a small town up in New York, about an hour north of New York City. I always like to tell people
I think of the Bergen Record when I think of you. Anytime I think of you, I think of you in a broken elevator with George Steinbrenner at Yankee Stadium. and literally, I think, like, when Seinfeld wrote the stuff he wrote about Steinbrenner, I think that you were consulted.
I tell you what, I could have been. I did interview George many, many times. God rest his soul. Yeah.
We all mellow, right? I mean, even you and I. I mean, I'm 48 now, so, I've known you since I was 15. I believe it's true. And, you've had this second turn in life as an author and, really done something I think you always sort of wanted to do, was branch out of the toy department in sports. I remember you getting off a plane from, like, the St. Louis, Kansas City World Series in '85, and I saw you, and I'm like, man, you were there, and it was Brett Saberhagen and George Breton, and must have been the coolest thing, and you're like, nah, it's all right, it's just what I do, and then 10 years later, you were doing comedy, and then, your books aren't comedy. I mean, I read your Rob Weinhold book. I mean, you've branched out into all sorts of spaces as a writer, which is what you are, right?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. The newspaper industry has gone downhill, as you know. So when I left the Sun about 3 years ago, Nestor, it was time. The Sun is struggling. I still have a lot of friends there, and I love what they do. But it was a great time to leave that struggling industry and get into book writing. And it's been a lot of fun. I've been working with some fabulous people. Worked with Ed Hale and Larry Noto, the local comedian. You know him. You worked with Rob Weinhold, a terrific guy who started a crisis leadership fund, and now I'm actually writing the memoir of Ed Norris, former police commissioner here. I know he is on another station, another sports talk station, but that's what we're doing. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, it's interesting you would pick Ed Norris as well in this because he had a lot of crisis management that he went through. Ed Hale, a lot of crisis management he went through. I mean, life is about managing crises, right? And if you're going to write about the real crux of whatever issue any of us would ever want to write about. I mean, I'm turning 50 in a couple of years, and I've got my memoirs and stories. But, I mean, it's at times of crisis that you find out what you're made of. And, you leaving the Sun was a little bit of a crisis to some degree. You changing from being a sports writer to chasing the Dave Barry pathway was also something that, anytime you make a move in your life, you take on new challenges and new responsibilities. No doubt about that.
Well, and all these guys, all the people that I've written about, biographies, memoirs, they've all been people, as you said, gone through crisis, but they've all been great people to deal with, too. And they've all had really compelling life stories. They've overcome a lot. In the case of Larry Noto, here was a guy, I know you know him, Baltimore comedian, and here was a guy who never hit the big time and tried to get to the big time, never hit it, and really had to reconcile himself with the fact that he was never going to be a headliner. From the very beginning of his life, he wanted to be a superstar comedian, and it just never happened. And so that was a really great project to work with Larry on his memoir because, not all of us can get to the very heights that we want to climb to. We can't get to the very heights of our, whatever our passion is and whatever our job is. So those are the kinds of people that I really, really like to write about.
Well, I mean, you're writing a lot of books. I mean, it feels like you're prolific. I mean, do you have like 3 a year, 4 a year? Look, I've written 4 books, right? And every time, and probably the hardest thing to reconcile for me is being so type A and so, especially earlier in my life, talkative and chatty. People would not understand how quiet I am when I'm not doing this, right? You know what I mean? Like that writing a book is the most solitary, sit in the corner. You know, when I wrote the football book a couple years ago, I mean, it was 120, 150 days. And I mean, like, no hockey games, no social media, you know, no nothing other than sitting in a corner with a cat, refilling the coffee mug or the water, because that's what writing a book is about. It is a very solitary thing, and not everyone can do that.
It's a totally solitary pursuit, and you know what? It can be isolating too. And, you know, in your case, you were putting everything into that 3 month.
Well, I mean, I promised to have it out on Father's Day, right? So they win the Super Bowl the first week of February, and my promise was that it would be there on Father's Day. It has a couple typos in it that, quite frankly, if I just would have spent another week with it, right, it would have been better. But I had a deadline, and we all know about deadlines from the newspaper business. I just felt like, but I felt like any hour that I didn't spend with it, I would regret later. You know, that's kind of how you feel when you have a deadline. Right?
Well, you do. You know, I haven't had deadlines quite as tight as the one that you're talking about, but you know, it takes me about a year to do the research, to write the book, to do the reporting, the writing, and get it to the publisher on time. I still have a deadline, but not quite as tight as yours. But it usually takes me, I would say, anywhere from 9 months to a year to write these books. And again, it's just been fabulous. It's been great transitioning into this kind of a thing where you're writing books about people that people in Baltimore care about.
Is that your criteria? Is people in Baltimore would care about them?
Yeah, for the most part. Now, the books that I've written, I did a lot of sports novels for young readers with Cal Ripken. But this is different. These biographies and memoirs are different because they're about local people. Cal, of course, has a national following and national recognition. These other people really don't. So I've been working with a publishing house. It's called Apprentice House. It's a division of Loyola University here in Baltimore, and they put out a lot of these regional books. And so for me, it's just been a marriage of convenience with Apprentice House. And you know, everybody knows Ed Hale. Not everybody knew Larry Noto, but certainly he's got a lot of followers here. And Rob Weinhold is, as you know, the former spokesman for the Baltimore Police Department. Very visible guy who really has started this wonderful crisis management firm that so many people use these days. So these guys are all Baltimore. They're recognizable names in Baltimore, so going with a regional press really made sense.
Kevin Cowherd, my lifer pal and longtime humorist, as well as old sports columnist back when I got at the Evening Sun in 1986. By the way, wasn't that the greatest night ever with Jack Gibbons? And, you know, I bragged about it a little here, and to some people in our audience, certainly the names and the faces of the newspapers. It's how I built my living, you know, back at the paper in the 80s and into the 90s. I'm 25 years on the radio on December 13th, Kevin.
Wow.
So it'll be 25 years on December 1-3. So I'm counting down the days to that as well. But, you know, for Jack Gibbons to have been such an incredible part of a whole generation of sports people here, and probably the most humble dude any of us know, on one evening, people came from all parts of the country to honor him about 6 months ago, and working at the News American as I did, at the Evening Sun, the Baltimore Sun, the digital side, seeing what sports media represented for the last, let's be honest, half a century was represented in that room.
Yeah, it was a great night. I'm so glad you were there because you and Jack go back, as you said, so long. And Jack is just such a wonderful man, a great editor, a guy who worked for the News American, worked for the Evening Sun, worked for the Baltimore Sun, and it just had such a tremendous influence on so many writers, young and old. And just a wonderful guy. You know, I always say if you think about the greatest boss you ever had, and in my case, the greatest editor, and Jack Gibbons is right up there. That's the kind of man he was. he knew good writing, he recognized good writing, and he appreciated it. And he made you feel like, you know, you'd run through a wall for that guy. So the fact that we all got together to honor him after such a great career in journalism was it was terrific, and it was just a wonderful night, as you said.
You know what's amazing? I put the TV on the other night, and Ken Rosenthal's on from the World Series with his bow tie, and I'm like, I remember the day Jack walked in and said, This guy, I'm bringing him down from Camden, New Jersey. He covers the Flyers, and I had covered a Flyers Caps game and met Ken Rosenthal. And 30 years later, he's the guy on television with the bow tie doing that, and that was Jack Gibbons. And everything I've ever done, I talked about 25 years on the radio. The reason I've been on the radio for 25 years and created NST was because of Jack Gibbons. So, I mean, there's so many lifelines that lead to that, which brings me to the next thing. When I think about Jack's real gift to me on the journalism side, it was about integrity and ethics. And I tell you, in this political season, Kevin, and seeing what I see and the beliefs that are held and what's going on Calvert Street, and as you've pointed out, not just Calvert Street, every Calvert Street in the country where newspapers used to have some level of ethics and integrity to hold politicians, the public, businesses accountable. You know what's happened with the baseball team here. We're seeing fans not coming to the games. I tell you, the deterioration of the newspaper industry and journalism as a whole could really be, traced to the beginning of the fall of civilization as we know it. And I'm not being funny. I just think that newspapers served a really, really vital role that I don't know where the next part of that is going to come from.
Oh, I totally agree. And, this watchdog role of journalism and of newspapers is just rapidly diminishing. Who's gonna hold these politicians? Who's gonna hold their feet to the fire? Who's gonna uncover corruption at City Hall? Who is going to look into some shady deals that baseball teams, football teams, basketball teams do? It's always reporters, and normally it's reporters from the newspapers that do this kind of thing.
Well, here's the problem. If you uncover shady dealings, as I have with the Orioles for 25 years, you get your press pass taken away, and they tell you to get out. And I can't imagine in 1983 George Steinbrenner taking your press pass and having that go well. I don't think that would have gone well in the 1980s. Now we got people running for president that haven't had a press conference in 4 months and who just summarily just ban questions. I mean, and these people are electable. It's insane to me. It really is. And, I know we grew up with David Simon. I know he wrote about this stuff here locally. Those kind of people can't get jobs anymore. People that report on this, no one employs them anymore.
Well, I can only speak for newspapers, and just the role that newspapers have always had as this watchdog is just diminishing. That's the sad part about it. And newspapers traditionally reported on everything, politics, culture, lifestyle, sports, and their influence is waning. And it's just a shame. And I don't think the proliferation of all these websites that purport to do this kind of thing, I don't think they're not looking into things as rigorously as newspapers always did. So it's it's sad to me to see that role diminish the way it has. And I don't see this turning around anytime soon. All these newspapers, Nestor, as you know, they're just hanging on. I mean, even much bigger papers than the Baltimore Sun are just hanging on to readers. So very, very tough time for daily journalism.
He is Kevin Cowherd. He and I both cut our teeth as very young men in the newspaper industry. He's a little older than I am. He's writing books these days around town. They'll see Cal Ripken books, Ed Hale, Rob Weinhold, also working with Ed Norris, also Larry Noto. I don't want to leave anything out, but the one thing I would say all of these people have in common, other than just being local, is you somehow were fascinated by them, right? I mean, like the reporter in you said there's a story here that I would write as a Sunday, 80-inch, two-part, double truck, takeout piece is what we would call it in the newspaper industry, an essay, or a study of a person, except you've taken that to the next level of they have even more to say than a Sunday magazine piece.
Oh, absolutely. And that it's a great point. People always ask about the difficulty of writing books, and you know how this works. It is just like a big takeout, and a takeout, of course, was a long story that you would do for a newspaper. So it's an expanded takeout. each of the people that I've written about in terms of biographies and memoirs have come to me with just fascinating stories. And as I listen to them, you can see the book develop. I mean, you can see exactly where it's going to go. That, to me, you have to have a compelling life story. If you're going to write a biography about somebody, you're going to write a memoir about someone, that person has to have a compelling life story. All these people do. And it's just as you said, you're just developing it. You could write, as you were saying, an 80-inch, 100-inch story for the newspaper when newspapers had those types of stories, and you just expand it to write a book. So, yeah, you know what? It's the craft of writing, Nestor. You expand it, but it's still the craft of writing and telling a story.
Still like sports, Kev? I mean, were you compelled to watch the Orioles and the Blue Jays and Buck Showalter and Zach Britton?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, did you have an 18 to 20-inch column in you the night that Britton sat there pulling splinters out of his backside in Toronto?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty of sports. You can second guess. It's really hard to second guess Buck Showalter. He's such a terrific manager. But in that case, all second guessing and all criticism was fair. I thought he waited too long to pull the trigger. He didn't pull the trigger. That was the problem. Sure, absolutely. I still love sports. I still follow sports constantly. And I'm just like every other fan. Something will happen, and it becomes this fascinating sidelight. And as a former sports reporter, I'm always thinking, man, that would have been a great column. So, yeah, sure.
All of these guys you've written about, by the way. Ed Norris, despite the police thing and talks about sports. By the way, no one was more magnanimous or kind to me in my wife's illness than Ed Norris, so I want to give Ed a shout-out. If you see him, tell him I said hello. Cal Ripken, Ed Hale owns the soccer team. Rob Weinhold worked in and around Cal Ripken in sports and sports places. I mean, there's still some sports in here, Cowherd. You're on the phone with me. You know me through sports, so you got a lot of sports in you. Got a lot of balls in you, I'd say. At bats, too, by the way. Maybe some pucks.
I mean, look, I've loved sports forever. I've played every sport. I've followed it. The one thing I don't like so much is now that when you cover sports, you also have to cover the business of sports now. You have to cover contracts. You have to cover all sorts of things like that, which I don't like. To me, I'd rather talk about the athletes themselves and the games they play. But, I'm still fascinated by all of it, and follow the Ravens, follow the Orioles, University of Maryland basketball and football. It's still a big, big part of my life.
All right, so run me through how you feel about the Buck Showalter Britton thing. Play sports fan here, Kevin Cowherd. This is a tough 6-month period for Buck, right? I mean, they can't win another game. The last act was foolish by anyone's measure, including probably himself, but I've never heard him admit that he screwed up. I mean, and maybe that's part of the Fonzie in him. He'll never say he was, but I mean, I haven't found anybody that thought that was a good use of the bullpen. And I've said, that could really come back to haunt him because he's no longer the smartest guy in the room at that point. And there's a level of trust there that he had to go in and look at Adam Jones and the rest of these guys and say, I let Ubaldo Jimenez wreck our season. It's the same reason he didn't start Jimenez that night. And I think that's a tough thing to overcome, and the only way he overcomes it is by being in the World Series next year, right? I mean, the only way you can, otherwise that's going to be the moment that's talked about. Remember the night that, he left Britton in the bullpen and the best pitcher in baseball never made it out? If that's as far as they go, this is the first time I've ever heard criticism of Buck, by the way. So he's had the cleanest sheet in 5 years and the cleanest run in the history of sports leadership in Baltimore that I've seen, and I've been watching it for 32 years, and so have you. No one has ever gone through this with more of a white suit than Buck has, I think.
Oh, I totally agree. But, my feeling is this. This guy is so well established, so well regarded in baseball that he made this decision and he's going to stick with it. Do I think it was the right decision? No, I don't think it was the right decision. Do I think that the second guessing was fair? I really do. But you know something, Nestor? This guy has such a great career, has had such a great career. He is totally confident in what he does. Now, did he go home that night after it was all over and second guess himself? He probably did. But I
hope he did.
But I don't think he will be defined. I'm sure he did. But I don't think he'll be defined by that because he has had such a long career. Now, I'll tell you this. if he was a young manager, 2, 3, 4 years at the game, that kind of a move can ruin him. I mean, can just absolutely ruin him and ruin any legacy that he's trying to create. I don't think that's going to happen in Buck's case. I think he's going to be thinking about it for a long time. But he's too good. He's too sharp. It's a blip in his career, as far as I'm concerned.
He is Kevin Cowherd. He writes books. You've heard of him. He was at the Baltimore Sun for 30 years now, doing it out on the side, writing books about all sorts of Baltimore figures. You can check them out. You can check him out at kevincowherd.com, as well as his Facebook, LinkedIn, and anywhere the internet is served. All right, last thing for you, and this is something, I'm sort of long-winded, like Joe Posnanski, curiously long posts from time to time, and I've been in the middle of writing this and thinking about it, and I've spoken to it a little bit, but I want to give it to you and hear your thoughts on this. So I'm a PSL holder, right? Obviously, my battles with the Orioles are well-founded and, will be part of my legacy, as well as his, quite frankly, over the last 25 years, but I still love the Orioles. I love baseball. One of the things I predicted when I did the walkout 10 years ago was that people would stop caring if they didn't treat people better. And, my beef with the Angelos group has always been they treat people poorly. They treat everyone poorly. And this summer, they had a really good baseball team, a compelling baseball team, a team that hit a lot of home runs. They had some Adam Jones guys and some young guys and a Machado who were going to be in the Hall of Very Good, and other up-and-comers and Scope and these guys and Britton and good pitching and all of that stuff. Yet people didn't want to come to the ballpark. And, we could talk about the riots and people staying away and the perception of that. And I will buy any compelling argument that's given to me. But the bottom line is they're a brand that's teetering. Now, they're making a ton of money off stealing all this money in the cable television deal. So they don't really need people to show up. That's the dirty little secret. But you've seen the Orioles diminish here. You've seen what's happened with Washington baseball that was always a stinking turd, and it isn't anymore, and they're good, and they're here to stay. But how can the Orioles fix their brand to the point where on weekend nights in September when they're winning, people want to come to the ballpark, and the Ravens are having a similar problem. So I'm not an apologist for the Ravens because there will be a ton of Steelers fans in the stadium this week. There were a ton of Raiders fans, a ton of Redskins fans in the stadium, and I see people selling their PSLs. I see tickets readily available on my Facebook every week. Maybe we've hit the saturation point, bro. Maybe Rome's in decline, not just for Baltimore sports, but around the country.
Well, I guess so. I was really mystified as to why the Orioles weren't drawing better down the stretch. I couldn't figure it out. People advance all sorts of theories. You touched on a couple of them. Washington having a ball club now, still continuing to take fans away from the Orioles. Freddie Gray unrest, although I never hear anybody talk about that.
I hear it everywhere. I'm from Dundalk, bro. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm just saying, I see the most racist, awful things that I have to unfollow on my Facebook, on my Twitter. I know you're not on Twitter, but I am amazed at what people will put out into the world with their name and their image and their family and their employer next to it. I mean, I'm aghast. I'm astonished. I mean, I just am. But all that being said, I see a ton of I don't come to the city because I don't want to get mugged. It's not safe. Now, that being said, I live at the harbor. I've lived here for 13 years. I watched the city on fire out the window last spring. I did. I saw the fireball in the sky. I had known many people affected by it. That night, my deepest fear was that the city will never recover financially, from a tourist standpoint, from hotels, from businesses, from people wanting to live here, from people not wanting to come. And meanwhile, the Orioles decided to play a baseball game for no one, shutting the stadium down, and the lead story on every news channel that night was the Orioles playing a game for no one. I thought it was the dumbest of a lot of dumb things, a lot of mean-spirited, awful things Peter Angelos has done to me and others. I thought that was the worst thing you could do for your brand, was to say, stay out, we don't need you tonight. And then the next year, some people say, it ain't safe to go down there, Kevin. I can't go down there. I might get mugged. Well, okay, That's not true, but if you believe it's true, then you're not going to drive down here from Bel Air or from Hagerstown or from the Eastern Shore or from wherever you come from, that people used to come and make Baltimore a destination in that way. It's certainly here. It's open for business. It's safe. I walk through the city every day of my life, but there are people who won't come. I mean, that's just a fact, and I think all the hotels and restaurants would tell you the same story.
Yeah, look, as I said, I haven't personally talked to anybody who said that. I don't doubt that that's been advanced as a theory, and maybe there's something behind that. But, Nestor, the other thing is, you can't discount the fact that going to a ball game, going to a Ravens game in particular, but going to an Orioles game is expensive.
Sure.
Everybody talks about, they talk about wage stagnation. People aren't making the money that they used to make. And so, there has to be a saturation point with how many sports events, concerts, plays, movies, things of that nature that people can go to. I think that while going to a baseball game is still much more affordable than going, say, to a Ravens game, even the Orioles, I think, are being affected by this. I think so. To me, it's a combination of all those things.
I don't go to the movies anymore. I mean, as an example, because it is pricey, and I don't feel like it's worth it. You know what I mean? It's not worth the time or the money for me. I mean, if I give you $100 right now, you may use it to go buy a nice dinner. You may use it to go buy a book or a DVD. You might use it to go. I mean, if all things being equal, people spend their money. They decide where they're going to spend their money, and right now, the Orioles and to some degree, the Ravens are a place that they're deciding that they'd rather put that in the Ocean City Fund or wherever, their kids' education fund, whatever it is. But we are seeing that it's going the other way. That concerns me as a guy that's built my life around sports, Kevin.
Well, and the other thing you got to consider too is the Ravens are not playing good football. Okay, I mean and we know that there are fans here. There are fans who bleed purple. Yeah, okay, but there are a lot of fans who just will not. They will jump off the bandwagon. That's the case for the Orioles too. It's a case for any sports team. You have that loyal core, and then you have people that are, dilettantes, right? They show up when the team's doing well. There's a lot of factors here. I don't think we can point to just one, but I think that these franchises are all worried about it. The other thing is, you keep hearing about, people have these great TVs now. Why should I go to the ball game? I could see the game better on TV, in high def, and it costs me far less. I mean, there's lots of factors at work here. And, if you own a sports franchise, I think you got to be worried about that because eventually, if this kind of thing keeps up, you're going to have fewer and fewer people in the ballpark. We're seeing it now, but I'm saying it could be even worse in 10 years from now.
Kevin Cowherd is here. He's been my lifer pal, longtime columnist, sports columnist, humorist, and now local author. You can follow him out on Twitter as well as Kevin Cowherd. He writes books about the likes of Ed Hale and Rob Weinhold and Ed Norris and Larry Noto and a Cal Ripken series of children's books as well. So I got to tell you a fun story here, right? I meet you as a kid, and all I wanted to be was you, right? I've told John Eisenberg that. I would tell John Stedman that if he were here, right? All I wanted to be was Oscar Madison, right? And you remember me as that kid, and I'm probably will always be that kid to you, right? Even though I'm 48 and have been through, been to hell and back and all that stuff. So when I first got my first little bit of money, right, the thing that I wanted more than anything when I lived at 428 Kane Street over off Eastern Avenue was I wanted a big screen TV. So in 1992, 93, when I started sports radio, my own business, I was doing well, I was DJing, doing all that. I went and spent whatever it cost at the time, $900, $1,200, $50, whatever it was, and I got the big TV, right, with the plastic front, right? It looked pregnant, right? It was about 3 feet wide, right? I mean, it was like sort of short and fat, right? And it was everything we could do to get it up the stairs, around the corner, in a row house, into my bedroom so that I could have a giant, whatever, 36 inches, 40, whatever it was. Bigger was better. It was the 80s and 90s, right? So I get the TV in my room, and I bought it literally, not because I love movies, but because I love sports, right? I got the sound around speakers, and I might have gone to Luskin's again. I don't know where the hell I got it, but I got it. So I get it home in 93, and right around then my career takes off, right? So I got it to watch the Super Bowl and the World Series on, right? So from that point forward, the Ravens came to town, and I had a press pass. And I went, and there was no World Series in 94, as you remember, right? So every year for the next 20 years, well, the next almost 30 years now, I've gone to the Super Bowl. I've been to every Super Bowl since 1995, right? So I have the big screen TV now in HD, and I never get to sit at home and watch it. So I went to the World Series from 95 until maybe like 07. I stopped going. The Ravens factored into that, the weather, the time of year, the lack of baseball interest, fight with Angelos, all that stuff. So I've been to a couple of World Series in the last 10 years. This was one of the years where I was going to go, right? But instead, I'm in my comfy bed. I've got my 36-inch TV that now costs $199, right? I have HD. It's 72 degrees. I've got my cat on my lap. The internet's here. The game's on in HD. I love listening to Joe Buck and Smoltz. And I remembered this the other night, like that I went through all this to get the TV, and I went to the games, and I had great times going to those World Series games. But there's nowhere else I'd rather be than at home watching it on the $199 TV that I dreamed about 30 years ago that I got that I never even used because I got to go to the real games. And now I'm jaded. I mean, I could have gone to Wrigley Field this week. I could have been in Cleveland this week. And instead, I'm watching it on TV because I'm getting old and fat and lazy, Kevin.
I'll tell you what, you can multiply that by millions and millions of people because lots of people feel the same way. They're just not going to spend that kind of money and go through the hassles of going to a ball game, the parking, the crowds, the ridiculous concession prices, the whole bit. They're just not going to do that when they have a great TV at home. So to me, that's one of the things that, all these owners are focused on it, and rightly so, because I think eventually that is really, really going to change things as to how we view sports. Do we go to the stadium anymore, or does it become like this, like a pageant rather than a ball game, and everybody's staying home watching it? So who knows?
Kevin Cowher, my life for pal. All right, so I'm wearing my 83 Oriole white panel hat, okay? That's what I'm wearing right now on Facebook, and you can share the video, too, later on, Kev, if you want. Give me one good Cal Ripken story. Something about Cal that I've never heard or I don't know. Because, I know you work directly, and I've known Cal. I flew to Beijing with Cal, 10 years ago when he did his tour. So I know Cal, too, and I run into Cal once in a while over coffee. But, I figure for a guy writing books, you have one good Cal cocktail party story for me.
Well, I don't know how good it is, but I can tell you this. It's been absolutely great working with Cal in terms of doing fiction for young readers. Here's a guy that loves to read and really can see the potential. When I approach him with a storyline, hey, why don't we have this character do this? Cal is the one who can take that and bring that real-life baseball experience to it. So people probably don't know that he loves books. He thinks that kids should do far more reading than they're doing. He loves that kind of a thing. So I think people would be surprised to know how much he loves books, how much he reads, and how much he appreciates it, and especially fiction. It's just something that, when we first started this, Cal wasn't even sure how we were going to do this, how we were going to do these novels, how much expertise did he have to put into it, and he put in a lot into it. But he's just been, that's about the only thing I can think of. We all know about how gracious and generous he was and how what a great ball player he was, signed all the autographs. But I think what people don't realize is how much he loves reading, loves these kids' books that we put out. We put out 6 of them. And, he's just a great guy. If you like reading, Cal likes you because that's his thing, books and reading. So it's been great to see that side of him, a side that I think most people don't see.
So here's some wisdom for you, Kevin. If somebody were to say to me, tell me about Cal Ripken, I'd say he's a well-read individual, and I guess you can't be well-read if you don't read, right?
You got to read. He loves to read, and he loves to read all sorts of things. And, of course, he reads a lot of business books and stuff like that. But he has been absolutely great to work with all these years.
Your Wikipedia said that you predicted the earthquake in '89 in San Francisco. I don't remember that. We were colleagues at the time, and I do remember being on the phone with Rosenthal in a phone booth and somebody getting mugged and all sorts of crazy things. But that's pretty cool that you predicted the earthquake. Not cool because it was awful, but That's an interesting thing to have on your Wikipedia, Kev. That's all I'm saying.
Well, but I did it jokingly, Nestor, because I wrote it in a column and I said, who knows what kind of a crazy World Series this could be. Look at, we could have an earthquake in one of the games. So it was. Believe me, I'm not the amazing Kreskin. It was just.
I was at an Elton John concert at the Capitol Center that night. I came out to get the score. It's 1989. There's no mobile device or Google. You know what I mean? And and there were no cell phones. I came out in the Capitol Center parking lot, and I put on WMAL, and they said there was an earthquake. It's like War of the Worlds. It was the strangest thing that's ever happened.
Oh, it was unbelievable to tune into that World Series and see like the Embarcadero on fire. Fisherman's Wharf. I mean, it was such a surreal World Series, and to have Al Michaels, what a pro Al Michaels is. I remember his voice and the calmness that he showed as he said, "Hey, we're having an earthquake here in the Bay Area." Just an amazing thing, amazing World Series, but certainly an amazing game while an earthquake is going on.
Love visiting with you, Kev, man. Thanks for coming on. Always a pleasure. Good luck with the books. Go back into your cave and continue to write, okay?
Will do, pal. Good luck to you, too.
As all writers do. He's Kevin Cowherd, local author, humorist, former sports guy. He's always a sports guy. One day I'm just going to bring him on and just BS about sports with him because I like doing that. But we moved around a little bit there with a lot of issues. It's been a long time since Kevin and I have gotten together and talked publicly. We do run into each other from time to time at book signings and other things like that. American author, humorist, and former award-winning sports and feature columnist for the Baltimore Sun. I'm reading from his Wikipedia. KevinCowherd.com. You can find him out there. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. It's all brought to you by our friends at BuyAToyota.com. Morning newspaper ships to your email inbox digitally, of course, at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there. Last but never least, if there's any breaking news, you get it first on the WNST text service. That is brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos is here every Thursday with the SSV. That's the Sunday Sports Voice. Heard on Thursdays from 3 until 5 here at WNST.net. You can find me anywhere the internet is served. Nasty at WNST.net is my email. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNS TV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.